Are you preparing for a big test in your psychology of learning class? Or are you just interested in a review of learning and behavioral psychology topics? Well, this video will guide you to some of the major learning issues including behaviorism, classical and operant conditioning. Before we start, it is important to understand what is the definition of learning in psychology. Now, learning can be defined in many ways, but most psychologists would agree that it is relatively permanent change in behavior that results from experience. During the first half of the 20th century, the school of thought known as behaviorism rose to dominate psychology and sought to explain the learning process. Behaviorism sought to measure only observable behaviors. Behavioral learning falls into generally three categories. The first is the classical conditioning. Now, classical conditioning is a learning process in which an association is made between a previously neutral stimulus and a stimulus that naturally evokes a response. For example, in Pavlov's classical experiment, a very famous experiment, the smell of food was the naturally occurring stimulus that was paired with the previously neutral ringing of the bell. Once an association has been made between the two, the sound of the bell alone could lead to a response. Now, for example, if you don't know how to swim and were to fall into a pool, you would take actions to avoid the pool. This is generally classical conditioning. Now, coming to the second one, that is called the operant conditioning. Now, operant conditioning is a learning process in which the probability of a response occurring is increased or decreased due to reinforcement or punishment. First studied by Edward Thorndike and later by B.F. Skinner, the underlying idea behind operant conditioning is the consequence of our action shape voluntary behavior. Skinner described how reinforcements could lead to increases in behaviors where punishment would result in decreases. He also found that the timing of when reinforcements were delivered influenced how quickly a behavior was learned and how strong the response would be. The timing and rate of reinforcement are known as schedules of reinforcement. For example, your child might learn to complete their homework because you reward them with treat or praise. Now, the third is observational learning. Observational learning is a process in which learning occurs through observing and imitating others. Albert Bandura's social learning theory suggests that in addition to learning through conditioning, people also learn through observing and imitating the actions of others. Generally, the infants are more prone to observational learning. Now, basic principles of social learning theory. As demonstrated in his classical Bobo doll experiment, people will imitate the action of others without direct reinforcement. Four important elements are essential for effective observational learning. That is, attention, motor skills, motivation, and memory. For example, a teen older sibling gets a speeding ticket with the unpleasant results of fines and restrictions. The teen then learns not to speed when they take up driving. Now, coming to the history of the psychology of learning. One of the first thinkers to study how learning influences behavior was psychologist J.B. Watson, who suggested in his seminal 1913 paper, Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, that all behaviors are a result of the learning process. Psychology, the behaviorists believe, should be the scientific study of observable, measurable behavior. Watson's work includes the famous Little Albert experiment in which he conditioned a small child to fear a white rat. Behaviorism dominated psychology for much of the early 20th century. Although behavioral approaches remain important today, the later part of the century was marked by the emergence of humanistic psychology, biological psychology, and now the cognitive psychology. The other important figures in the psychology of learning include Edward Thorndike, Ivan Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, and Albert Bandura. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.